The pain body. It's one big, tricky cycle. It always seeks out more pain. It feeds on that pain just to survive. Now, this is Eckhart Tolle's teaching, what he calls the pain body, an accumulation of old emotional pain that lives within you. It feeds on drama and tragically perpetuates suffering. And here's what most people just don't understand. For spiritually awakened souls, toxic families aren't random accidents. They're actually assignments. What you're about to discover will completely reframe how you see your childhood. Because if you're someone who experienced family dysfunction, emotional neglect, or outright toxicity, and you're now on a path of spiritual awakening, there's a real reason those two things are connected, and it's not the reason you think. Most spiritual teachings will tell you that your difficult childhood was karma, or a lesson, or something you simply needed to heal. And while there's truth in that, Tolle's teachings go deeper, much deeper. He teaches that consciousness doesn't just emerge despite dysfunction. In many cases, it emerges because of it. Here's what makes this revolutionary. Cutting-edge neuroscience, as recently as 2025, now validates exactly what Tolle has been teaching all along. A groundbreaking study from Yale University, yes, Yale University, found something that contradicts everything we thought we knew about childhood adversity. Researchers discovered that people who experienced low or moderate levels of adversity in middle childhood and adolescence showed statistically lower levels of anxiety than two groups, those with the very lowest levels of adversity overall, and those with the very highest levels of adversity. Read that again. Moderate childhood adversity created better outcomes than no adversity at all. This is one of the first studies to prove that the timing of adversity exposure matters and, more importantly, what underlying neural processes contribute to either risk or resilience following that adversity. The neuroscience reveals this. Childhood and adolescence are periods of dramatic changes in brain morphology and function. These periods represent windows of increased neurobiological plasticity, meaning the brain is more capable of rewiring itself in response to experience. In other words, adversity during these critical developmental windows doesn't just damage you. Under certain conditions, it can fundamentally rewire your brain for deeper awareness, greater resilience, and accelerated spiritual development. This is exactly what Tolle experienced. Before his transformation at age 29, he had what he describes as a rough childhood. He felt estranged from society. He suffered with severe depression and contemplated suicide. Then, one night in 1977, something shifted. An inner transformation occurred that would eventually lead him to write The Power of Now and teach millions about presence. But here's the key. That transformation didn't happen despite his painful childhood. It happened because the pain became so intense that his identification with it finally collapsed. Let me show you why this matters for you. The pain body, how family dysfunction becomes a spiritual catalyst. Tolle teaches that the pain body is not just your personal pain. It can be inherited through your family, or it can be part of the collective human pain body. This is profound, because what it means is that when you're born into a dysfunctional family, you're not just dealing with your own emotional wounds. You're inheriting accumulated pain that has been passed down through generations. Your mother's unprocessed grief, your father's unexpressed rage, your grandmother's silent resentment, all of it gets transmitted, not through genetics, but through unconscious patterns of behavior, emotional reactivity, and energetic resonance. In a healthy family environment, this transmission is minimal. Parents who are present, aware, and emotionally regulated don't pass on heavy pain bodies to their children, but in toxic families, the pain body is active. feeding and perpetuating itself. Children in these environments don't just witness dysfunction, they absorb it. They take it into their bodies as accumulated emotional pain. And here's what Tolle understood, that neuroscience is now confirming. This absorption creates two possible outcomes. Outcome 1. The child identifies with the pain body completely. They become it. They spend their entire lives unconsciously repeating the patterns, seeking situations that trigger the pain body so it can feed, and never questioning why they keep cycling through the same suffering. Outcome 2. The pain becomes so intense, so unbearable, that it forces a breaking point. The identification with the pain body shatters, and in that shattering, consciousness awakens. This is not theory. This is documented in research on post-traumatic growth. Studies show that resilience tends to enhance post-traumatic growth. After a traumatic experience, some individuals don't just recover, they transform. They develop capacities for awareness, meaning-making, and presence that far exceed what they had before the trauma. But here's the critical distinction that most people miss. Post-traumatic growth doesn't happen automatically. It doesn't happen just because you experienced pain. It happens when you stop identifying with the pain and start observing it. This is where Tolle's teaching becomes a precise map for transformation. He explains that the pain body's survival depends on your unconscious identification with it. As long as you believe you are your pain, the pain body continues to feed. It seeks situations that trigger more pain. It creates drama, conflict, and suffering because that's how it perpetuates itself. But the moment you become aware of the pain body, the moment you can observe it without being it, something shifts. You're no longer the pain. You're the awareness that witnesses the pain. And this is the exact mechanism by which toxic family environments become catalysts for spiritual awakening. Let me break down the 3 stages of this transformation that Tolle teaches. Stage 1, unconscious absorption of family pain. This is where most people spend their entire childhood, and often their entire lives. You're born into a family system that operates from unconsciousness. Maybe your parents are emotionally unavailable. Maybe there's addiction, volatility, narcissism, control, neglect. The specific form doesn't matter as much as the underlying pattern, unconsciousness perpetuating itself. As a child, you have no framework for understanding what's happening. You just absorb it. You feel the tension in your body when your father comes home angry. You learn to read your mother's mood to avoid triggering her rage. You develop hypervigilance. People-pleasing, use emotional shutdown. Whatever adaptations allow you to survive. And here's what neuroscience has discovered about this crucial stage. Your developing brain is literally wiring itself in response to this environment. The neural pathways that deal with threat detection, emotional regulation, and even your stress response are being formed during these absolutely critical windows of neuroplasticity. If your environment is chronically stressful, your amygdala, that's the part of your brain that's responsible for fear and emotional reactions, becomes hyperactive. Your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for conscious decision-making and emotional regulation, might develop differently than it would in a more stable environment. This is trauma wiring. And for many people, this wiring continues to run their lives, long after they've left their childhood home behind. But here's what the research also shows. That same neuroplasticity that caused the initial wiring creates the potential for profound rewiring later in life. You see, children and adolescents who experience adversity during these critical windows don't just develop trauma responses. They also develop what researchers like to call stress inoculation, a kind of calibrated resilience that comes from navigating difficulty. That Yale study, it actually found that people who experienced moderate childhood adversity showed neural patterns that were different, both from those who experienced no adversity and from those who experienced extreme adversity. Their brains had learned to respond to challenges in ways that promoted resilience rather than collapse. Osho would say, the pain body was forming, yes, but so was the potential for awakening. Stage 2, identification with the pain body. This is the stage where you might leave your family of origin, but you take the pain body with you. You think you've escaped. You've moved out, gone to college, started your own life. But the patterns, they just keep showing up. You find yourself in relationships that mirror your parents' dysfunction. You're attracted to partners who are emotionally unavailable, just like your father was. Or maybe you become the volatile one, just like your mother. You replicate the exact dynamics you swore you'd never repeat. And that's because the pain body is running on autopilot. It's an energetic pattern that lives in your nervous system, and it's seeking familiar situations to feed on. Osho teaches us that the pain body causes dysfunction by trapping you in an endless cycle of suffering. And the most insidious part, you don't even realize it's happening. You think you're just unlucky in love. You think you're just anxious or depressed. You think this is just who you are. This identification is what keeps the cycle going. And here's where most conventional therapy tends to focus: on healing the trauma, processing the emotions, understanding your childhood, all of which can be very valuable. But Osho teaches us that understanding the pain is not the same as transcending identification with it. You can spend years in therapy talking about your dysfunctional family, and you can develop deep psychological insight into why you are the way you are. But if you're still identified with the pain body, if you still believe you are your wounded inner child, you're just feeding the pain body with a new story about itself. This is not healing. This is the ego, creating a spiritual identity around being wounded. Osho is crystal clear about this. Recognizing that you have a pain body is a powerful first step, but the real transformation happens when you can observe the pain body without becoming it. And that leads to stage 3. Stage 3. Disidentification and the birth of presence. This is the breakthrough moment, and it often comes when the pain becomes unbearable. For Osho, it happened the night he contemplated suicide. He was 29 years old, lying in bed, consumed by thoughts of, "I cannot live with myself anymore." And then something shifted. He describes it as a sudden realization. If I cannot live with myself, who is the self I cannot live with? Who is the I that is observing this? In that moment, identification collapsed. He stopped being the depressed person and became the awareness that was witnessing the depression. This is the exact mechanism of spiritual awakening from within dysfunction. The pain doesn't go away immediately. The family patterns don't magically resolve themselves, but you're no longer identified with them. You're no longer the pain. You're the space in which pain arises and passes. And this is where the neuroscience becomes fascinating. Research on meditation and mindfulness from 2024 shows that practices which cultivate observer awareness, watching thoughts and emotions without identifying with them, produce measurable changes in brain structure. The prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for conscious awareness and regulation, becomes thicker. The amygdala, which is responsible for fear reactivity, becomes less reactive. The connectivity between brain regions that are involved in self-awareness and emotional regulation improves. In other words, disidentification is not just a spiritual concept, it's a neurobiological process. When you stop being your pain body and start observing it, your brain literally rewires itself. The trauma patterns don't have to run your life anymore. And here's what this means for people who were born into dysfunctional families. The very environment that created the pain body also created the conditions for awakening. Because the pain body, when it reaches a certain intensity, forces a choice. You can either identify with it completely and spend your life perpetuating it, or you can become so exhausted by it, so crushed by it, that identification finally breaks. And when it breaks, presence emerges. This is not to say that dysfunctional families are good or that abuse is justified. Absolutely not. But what Osho is teaching us, and what neuroscience is now validating, is that consciousness has a way of using even the most painful circumstances as catalysts for awakening. Souls that are ready for deep spiritual transformation often choose, on a level beyond conscious awareness, to incarnate into challenging family environments, precisely because those environments will accelerate the process of ego dissolution. Let me show you how this works at a practical level. The 3 signs your family, pain body, is activating and how to witness it. Sign 1, emotional overreaction to family contact. You get a text from your mother and suddenly your entire nervous system goes into fight or flight. Your heart rate spikes, your chest tightens, rage, anxieties or deep sadness floods your body, and it's completely disproportionate to what was actually said. This is the pain body activating. Osho explains that when the pain body is triggered, it takes over your awareness. You become the pain. You're no longer present. You're possessed by accumulated emotional charge from years of family dysfunction. Here's the practice. The moment you notice this happening, stop. Don't respond to the text. Don't call back. Don't engage with the content. Instead, bring your attention to your body. Where do you feel the activation? Is it in your chest, your stomach, your throat? Don't try to make it go away. Don't analyze why you feel this way. Just observe the sensations without the story. What's happening neurologically is profound. By bringing conscious attention to the bodily sensation without getting caught in the mental narrative, you're activating your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for conscious awareness. You're creating space between the stimulus and your reaction, and in that space, the pain body loses its power. Because it can only survive when you're unconscious, when you're identified. The moment you observe it, you're no longer it. Sign 2. Compulsive storytelling about your childhood. You find yourself telling the same stories over and over. How your father never showed up for you. How your mother was critical and controlling. How you were the scapegoat, the forgotten child, the one who had to parent your own parents. And every time you tell the story, you feel a familiar emotional charge. Sometimes it's righteous anger, sometimes it's victimhood, sometimes it's a strange satisfaction in how dysfunctional it all was. This is the pain body feeding itself through repetition. Osho teaches that the pain body loves to tell its story. It creates an identity around being wounded. And the more you repeat the story, the more you strengthen the neural pathways associated with that identity. This doesn't mean your story isn't true. It doesn't mean your family didn't cause real harm, but Osho would ask, are you telling the story to process it and move through it, or are you telling it to keep the pain body alive? There's a difference between acknowledging what happened and identifying as the person it happened to. Here's the practice. Notice when you're about to tell your family story. Pause. Ask yourself, am I telling this from presence or from pain body? If you're telling it from presence, there will be no emotional charge. You can describe what happened the way you describe the weather, factually, without needing the listener to validate your suffering or agree that you were wronged. If you're telling it from the pain body, you'll feel the emotional charge. You'll need the listener to react, to say, that's terrible, or you deserved better. You're seeking external validation of your pain because you're still identified with it. When you catch yourself doing this, don't judge it, just observe it. That's enough. Awareness is the transformation. Sign 3. Relationship patterns that mirror dysfunctional families. This is the most subtle sign and the most powerful. You keep ending up in relationships, romantic, friendship, professional, that recreate the exact dynamics you experienced in your family. If your father was emotionally distant, you're attracted to partners who are unavailable. If your mother was controlling, you find yourself with partners who try to manage every aspect of your life. If you were neglected, you unconsciously seek out people who can't see you. This is the pain body's most insidious mechanism. It doesn't just live in your past. It actively shapes your present by seeking familiar patterns. Why does it do this? Because the pain body feeds on pain and familiar pain. Feels safer than the unknown. Your nervous system learned to navigate a certain kind of dysfunction, and it keeps recreating that environment because that's what it knows how to handle. Osho teaches that this is completely unconscious. You don't wake up and think, I'm going to find someone who abandons me, just like my father did. Your pain body operates below conscious awareness, drawing you toward people and situations that will activate it. Here's the practice. When you find yourself in yet another version of your family dynamic, stop trying to fix the other person. Stop trying to make them different. Instead, ask yourself, what is being mirrored back to me right now? What pain body pattern is active? Then bring your awareness to the sensation in your body, not the story about why this person is wrong or why you always attract the wrong people. The sensation. Feel it fully. Observe it without resistance. And watch what happens. What's happening at a neural level is this. You're interrupting the automatic pattern. You're creating a moment of conscious choice instead of compulsive reaction. And over time, as you do this repeatedly, the neural pathways associated with the old pattern weaken, new pathways form. The pain body loses its grip, and you become capable of something most people never achieve, choosing relationships from presence instead of from pain. Why some souls awaken from dysfunctional families and others don't? This is the question that haunts people on the spiritual path. Why me? Why did I wake up when my siblings are still unconscious? Why am I the one doing the inner work when everyone else in my family is still perpetuating the same patterns? Osho would say, not everyone is ready, and that's not a judgment. It's just a recognition that consciousness has its own timing. But there are specific factors that research and spiritual teaching both point to. Factor 1, the intensity of the pain reached a breaking point. The Yale study found that moderate adversity creates resilience, but extreme adversity can overwhelm the system. There's a sweet spot where the pain is intense enough to force awakening, but not so overwhelming that it causes complete fragmentation. People who awaken from dysfunctional families often describe a moment where they couldn't take it anymore. The pain became unbearable, and in that unbearableness, something cracked open. For some people, that crack becomes the doorway to presence. For others, it leads to addiction, mental illness, or continued unconsciousness. The difference isn't in the pain itself, it's in what happens in response to the pain. Factor 2. Exposure to alternative models of consciousness. Research shows that resilience after trauma is enhanced by social support and positive experiences. What this means spiritually is that awakening is more likely when you encounter something that shows you there's another way to be. Maybe you read a book by Osho or another spiritual teacher. Maybe you met someone who embodied presence. Maybe you had a spontaneous experience of consciousness that showed you there's more to reality than the pain body's narrative. These exposures create cracks in the identification with pain. They show you that you're not your story. And once you've had even a glimpse of that, the pain body can never fully reclaim you. Factor 3. A level of soul development that chooses awakening over comfort. This is where Osho's teaching moves beyond psychology into metaphysics. He teaches that some souls are simply ready for awakening in this lifetime. And those souls often incarnate into challenging family environments, precisely because those environments will accelerate the process of ego dissolution. This doesn't mean they consciously chose abuse, but on a level beyond conscious awareness, the soul recognizes that comfort perpetuates unconsciousness and challenge creates the conditions for awakening. Your siblings might be in the same family, experiencing the same dysfunction, and yet not awakening. Why? Because their soul's curriculum in this lifetime might be different. They might need more time in unconsciousness. They might awaken later through different catalysts, or they might not awaken at all in this lifetime. And none of that is wrong. Osho would say, consciousness knows what it's doing. Trust the process. But if you're someone who is awakened, even partially, from family dysfunction, it's because something in you was ready to stop identifying with the pain and start observing it, and that readiness is not an accident. The practice, transforming family pain into presence. Here's the practice that integrates everything Osho teaches with what neuroscience validates. Step 1. Daily pain body observation. Every day, set aside 10 minutes to sit in stillness and bring your awareness to any residual emotional pain from your family. Don't try to fix it or understand it. Just feel it in your body. And where does it live? What does it feel like? Is it heavy, tight, hot, cold? Observe it the way a scientist would observe a phenomenon, with curiosity, not judgment. This practice does two things. It trains your brain to distinguish between you and the pain body, and it allows the pain to move through you instead of getting stuck. Research from 2024 shows that this kind of somatic awareness practice reduces amygdala reactivity and strengthens prefrontal cortex activity. In Osho's language, it weakens the pain body's grip and strengthens presence. Step 2. Interrupt the storytelling loop. Whenever you notice yourself telling your family story, pause mid-sentence. Literally stop talking. Then say, I'm noticing I'm telling this story from my pain body. Let me start again from presence. And then see if you can describe what happened without emotional charge. Factually, the way you'd describe a weather report, this practice rewires the neural pathways associated with identity. You're teaching your brain that you are not your story. You're the awareness that can choose whether or not to identify with the story. Step 3, practice conscious contact or conscious distance. This is where people get confused. They think spiritual awakening means you have to forgive your family, maintain contact, and be the bigger person. Osho would say, nonsense. Spiritual awakening means you're no longer controlled by unconscious reactions. It doesn't mean you have to subject yourself to toxic people, even if they're family. Here's the practice. Before any contact with family members, ask yourself, can I be present with this person without getting pulled into the pain body? If the answer is yes, engage consciously. Set clear boundaries. Don't expect them to change. Don't try to fix them. Just be present with what is. If the answer is no, create distance, not from anger or resentment, from presence. You're simply recognizing that in your current state of development, contact with this person activates your pain body too intensely to remain conscious. There's no guilt in this, no failure. It's just an honest assessment. And here's what research on trauma-informed care emphasizes. Sometimes the most healing thing you can do is remove yourself from the source of activation until your nervous system has had time to recalibrate. Step 4. Use family triggers as awakening practice. This is the advanced practice. Instead of avoiding all family contact or trying to create a pain-free life, you start to use family interactions as deliberate practice fields for presence. You know your mother's going to make that passive-aggressive comment. You know your father's going to ignore you at the family gathering. You know your sibling's going to bring up that old wound. And instead of dreading it or trying to prevent it, you go in prepared to observe your pain body's reaction in real time. This is what Osho calls using the present moment as your spiritual practice. The dysfunction doesn't magically disappear, but you're no longer at its mercy. You're awake within it, and the neuroscience supports this. Exposure to triggers in a controlled or conscious way, what's called stress inoculation in resilience research, actually builds the neural capacity to remain present under pressure. Each time you observe your pain body without identifying with it, you're strengthening the pathways of consciousness. You're training your brain to choose awareness over reaction. The final truth, your dysfunctional family was your soul's curriculum. Let me end with the most confronting teaching. Osho doesn't sugarcoat this. He doesn't tell you that everything happens for a reason in a way that makes you feel better about your pain. He tells you consciousness uses everything, including dysfunction, including abuse, including the worst things that happened to you, not because those things were good, but because consciousness is relentless in its drive toward awakening, and it will use whatever conditions are present, pleasant or unpleasant, to shatter identification with form. For some people, awakening comes through bliss, meditation, and spiritual experiences, and for others, it comes through crisis, pain, and the complete collapse of everything they thought they were. Neither path is better. They're just different curricula. And if you were born into a dysfunctional family, if you experienced dysfunction, neglect, or worse, you weren't given the bliss path. You were given the crucible path. The path where the ego is burned away not through gentle dissolution, but through intense heat. The path where identification shatters not because you meditated it away, but because the pain became so unbearable that you finally stopped believing you were the pain. And here's the truth that research on post-traumatic growth validates. Some of the most conscious, aware, present human beings on the planet came from the worst family environments. Not because the environment was good for them, but because they used it. They transformed it. They alchemize the pain body into presence. And you can do the same. Not by denying what happened, not by pretending it didn't hurt, but by recognizing that you are not the pain. You are not the wounded child. You are not your family's dysfunction. You are the awareness that witnesses all of it. The presence that was there before the pain and will be there long after the pain passes. Your dysfunctional family. It was never a mistake. It was the exact curriculum your soul needed to stop identifying with form and to finally recognize what you actually are. And what you actually are is consciousness itself, unbroken, untouchable, free. So, stop asking, why did this happen to me? Stop wishing you had a different childhood. Stop resenting the family you were born into. Instead, ask this: what is this pain teaching me? What is it revealing? What identification is it forcing me to release? And then watch, observe, witness, because in that witnessing, the pain body dissolves, not all at once, but gradually, inevitably, completely. And what remains is presence. The presence that was always here, waiting for you to stop running from the pain and start observing it. Your family gave you the gift of intensity, the gift of a pain body, so strong that you had no choice but to wake up or be consumed, and you chose to wake up. That wasn't an accident. That was your soul's assignment, and you're doing it right now, in this moment. Welcome home.